no. Okay. Hello, everybody. We're going to start the session. My name is Christopher Matthews. I work with CIFOR eCRAF, also actually here in Bonn. We have an office here in Bonn, so we are pretty close to this venue normally. And it's my pleasure to moderate this session for you. So the session here is about, it's called Myths, Realities and Solutions Towards High Integrity Forest Carbon Credits. Reducing emissions from deforestation, forest degradation is very high on the political agenda. If you look at the emissions from deforestation, forest degradation, they're only 9% of the global annual emissions of 40 gigatons, so they're 4.5. Sorry, they're 11%, not 9%. 11%, so 4.5 gigatons of these 40, and the rest is basically industry, fossil use, and so on. So you may ask why forests? Why are forests so high? But forests also fulfill a lot of environmental services to humanity and to the planet. Climate and water regulation and so on, and also providing livelihoods for people depending on the forest, actually for all of us, I would say. And so preserving forests is not only a climate objective, but a general objective in terms of development and human development also. Furthermore, forests can actually provide up to 30% of the sink that we need to grow in order to compensate for those emissions and or actually soak up those emissions. So there are lots of reasons to preserve forests, and forest carbon markets have sprung up to be part of the solution. Carbon markets should be high integrity, which means they should be not only preserving carbon, but they should also do it in a permanent way. They should be additional to what is already going on and to what would have happened anyway if there was no project. no carbon market, and they should avoid leakage, which means emissions displacement to areas that are not protected. They also should consider the environmental and social benefits, so the so-called safeguards, in a coherent way. So there are problems around carbon markets that are related to the question of carbon offsets. How much offsets are we going to allow, and how much of this should be just plain emission reductions? And that's a question that's being debated for a long time. There are questions around scale, so the project-based activities which are more belonging to the voluntary carbon markets versus the jurisdictional approaches which are more belonging to the compliance markets. And actually at this COP, I think there are also discussions on this going on. And finally, there are problems around methods, and that's what this event will be mainly about: the methods to assess emissions and to assess emission reductions achieved by projects, and with this by carbon markets. So part of this work comes out of our global comparative study on REDD+, that is going on for 15 years now. Part of it is based on our partnership with many partners, some of it former colleagues, now somewhere else. And this is actually a jointly organized event by CIFOR ICRAF, European Forestry Institute, and the Norwegian University of Life Sciences in Aarhus, Norway. And I thank all the partners that have been helping to organize this, and actually some of them are also here as speakers. I would like to jump right away into the session, but I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So we're going to have 3 speakers. 2 are in the room and 1 is online, and we're having then 2 panelists, also 1 in the room and 1 online. Speakers have 7 minutes to talk, and the panelists 6. You will be getting a sign from our assistant here, Luan, in the front, and please stick to your time. And those online, I will have to advise you via the microphone about the time. So stick to the time. We're going to go directly through the 3 presentations. Then we have a question and answer block at the end. So please jot your questions down for that moment. And those online, please write down your questions or comments in the chat, and we can then grab them from there. Anything I forgot? No. Okay, let's go directly into the presentations now. The first speaker is Kevin Brown. He's sitting next to me. He is a forest carbon and REDD advisor at Wildlife Conservation Society. He has a background in remote sensing on forest and landscape modeling, and has used this to provide technical assistance to governments on REDD plus MRV, monitoring, reporting, verification, and also greenhouse gas reporting more general, and to the private sector. His focus is to advance natural climate solutions within WCS, and particularly related to the conservation landscapes in WCS. He also works on technical standards, and he is also main author of Verra's forthcoming consolidated methodology for avoided unplanned deforestation. I hope I got everything right.
I'm not the main, I'm an author.
Sorry?
I'm not the main author, I'm an author.
Did I say the main author? A main author, sorry. Sorry for that. Yeah, okay. Okay, Kevin, the floor is yours.
Great. Great, thanks so much. I'll just skip introductions then. That was lovely. So at WCS, we are practitioners of REDD+. We are trying to use this as, we see this as an important opportunity to get long-term sustainable finance into our conservation landscapes. And it's really the best opportunity we have out there. It's the most mature market-based mechanism. So we really do support the mechanism. But there are lots of questions now coming up about integrity and making sure that REDD has high integrity. So I'll explore that a little bit and then talk a little bit about how some of the technical standards are advancing to address these questions about integrity. The world has been trying to implement REDD+ at various scales for over 15 years now. You have project scale with voluntary carbon market, jurisdictional scale, under the various standards, and now that we've had this body of experience to look back and reflect on, we're getting some critiques about integrity in two different ways. One is atmospheric, and one is issues about equity and benefit sharing, biodiversity. And I like to think about, for REDD to be successful around the world, it's like a stool that has three legs. There's really three important components. You have the atmospheric integrity. It's critical. We've heard a lot about that in the press lately. You have to have equitable outcomes. But the piece that doesn't get talked as much about in certain circles is the financial viability. Because REDD is not supposed to be a boutique mechanism. It's supposed to be something that creates a meaningful contribution to addressing climate change. So it's something that has to work financially, and it can't just run on donor funds. It has to be something that works and has to have a lot of private sector involvement. So when you talk about the finances of REDD+, people often think about the payments that you get for the credits. But there's a huge amount of expense and risk that goes into setting up these projects, just like any business. You don't know if it's going to work out at first. You don't even make any money necessarily for 10 or 15 years down the road. So the private sector, what we've seen, really wants to get involved in REDD+, but there is a limit to how much risk that they can take on. And certain types of risk, they're better able to mitigate. But some of what we've seen in the critiques of atmospheric integrity have come out are concerning, because it's this idea of with 20/20 hindsight, you can go back and second guess whether a baseline was accurate or not. So the idea that a project or a program that followed the rules set out by a standard could then still 10 years down the line be told, oops, sorry, you don't get credits because there was something wrong with the standard. That strikes fear in the heart of the private sector. Want to touch for a moment about jurisdictional programs. At WCS, we do a lot of project scale implementation, but I think the consensus is growing that we need to be moving towards jurisdictional. We're very supportive of that, but there has to be a meaningful pathway to get something that works at a scale that it works at up to a jurisdictional program. And the reality is that we haven't seen a lot of successfully implemented nested REDD programs around the world, despite it being talked about for 10 plus years. And part of, I think, is the issue is that we talk a lot about the endpoint of having a jurisdictional program, and we talk a lot about the start, where we have many countries have projects that are doing well, that they have REDD projects that are doing well, but getting from what I'm calling REDD Generation 1.0, the existing methods and standards that we have, up to a jurisdictional program, it's a big leap. I think it's underappreciated how the complexity and amount of resources needed to get to a fully operating jurisdictional program. So what's missing is this middle linkage, and that's where I think some of these new voluntary carbon standards that are being developed are really exciting, because they kind of they bridge that missing middle. So I mentioned this term REDD Generation 1.0 in most of the avoided deforestation methodologies, like at VCS, you create a reference region, and then you use that to inform your baseline. And this approach has come under a lot of criticism lately. But just go back in your mind, 15 years to what kind of data there was available. There were no global forest maps. There was no cloud computing. So it was really the best that the world had available at the time. And Now, with the capabilities we have now, we're moving to these, what I'm calling Generation 2.0 methodologies, which are using a jurisdictional scale data sets, nested activity data. We're able to do things at bigger scale for lower cost now. So, I think it's an important thing to remember that there were reasons that those decisions were made at the time. It's not that anyone was trying to, create a system that didn't work. One of the, my colleague at Vera will talk more about this, but there's a new Vera methodology, avoided deforestation methodology, coming out very soon. And two important things about it are the way that it improves both the integrity of the atmospheric claims, but also the potential to scale without sacrificing either of those. So on the achieving scale side, what it does is more than anything, it gives the private sector and governments the confidence that if they commit their resources, their investment, their land into these projects, that they're going to get a financial return at the end if they follow the rules, and that all of those, the credits that come out of that can be easily nested into a jurisdictional program. So it's not threatening any other plans that they have in the country to pursue a jurisdictional program. And then on the, So I guess this is my, I'll just conclude with saying that, REDD Plus has been under development for 15 years, been a ton of work put into it. The WCS does welcome the critiques around integrity, but we do caution that those be diverted towards a constructive direction, and that these new methodologies exemplified by the new Vera consolidated REDD methodology are moving things in the right direction, and that countries should definitely be looking to the possibility of adopting these methodologies as a way to help them transition more quickly to a jurisdictional program. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Good points. As I said, we're moving right away to the next speaker, which is Erin Sills. She's online. She is the E.F. Conger Professor of Forest Economics and Head of the Department of Forestry and Environmental Resources at North Carolina State University. She's also been a research associate with CIFOR for many, many years, and also with EFD, Environment for Development. She has a PhD in natural resource economics from Duke University and a BA in public policy from Princeton. So, Erin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, everything is perfect.
And let's see, Vanny, are you running my slides for me?
Yeah, can the technician help because the computer is not working here?
Just a second.
Can the technician?
We don't know how to make it work.
It is not.
It's frozen.
Yeah.
Little glitch.
And I don't have the option to share, so I can't help you out.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe in the view of time, but we also have the same as.
Yeah, I'm happy to go later if you can get someone else's slides up and
It's all
running.
coming from the same computer, so we have to wait. Anyway, maybe in the meantime we can allow 1-2 questions about what Kevin just said. Okay, the gentleman in the front.
Yes, Axel Michaelova from Perspectives and the University of Zurich. You said ex post evaluation of additionality is a problem. Isn't it that an systemic overestimate of the baseline was the problem? And for example, this famous Kariba project in Zimbabwe, where it became clear after a certain time that the baseline deforestation factor apparently, which of course at the time the project was set up, was correctly calculated using the Vera methodology, turned out to be really overestimated. And what would be your suggestions? Would you say, can one then remedy it as South Pole has proposed by reducing the volume of credits in the following period? Because, it is clear there is an environmental integrity problem. I agree with you that there is a problem of the incentive for the investor, but somehow one needs to reconcile those two.
Okay, quick answer from Kevin, please, and then we...
Sure, and I know that I think you'll get some more context from Aaron's presentation as well. I would say that generally that the benefit of the ex post evaluation is to help to improve the standards. Like that's its main role, and through that you might identify that there was some systematic bias in the way the standards was written, and that should be corrected absolutely. But I think that my point is more to zoom in on a single project, and you're always going to find that reality differed from whatever you projected it was going to be, 6 years prior to that reality. So, in some cases it will be higher, some it will be lower, as long as it's not a systematic issue. But I think the point is that if there's a fault there, it's in the standard, and the remedy is to correct the standard going forward.
Okay, I think we're going to hear more about this. So, Aaron, we are ready now. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay,
yep.
Good. Go
Fantastic.
ahead, please.
That's a great segue because I'm going to continue on the same theme. So talking about forest carbon accounting, which is essential for all of the institutions that we have set up to capture the potential of forests to help mitigate climate change, whether that's thinking about which areas are contributing to an NDC, which jurisdictions are generating offsets for a cap and trade system, or which RED projects are generating RED or carbon credits that they can sell. So in all of those cases, there's essentially a contract involved where some parties are promising to reduce forest carbon emissions, and some parties are promising to provide recognition or rewards or compensation for that. And so we need an accounting system set up to implement the contract. But I would argue that we equally need an impact evaluation system set up to evaluate how much those contracts are actually helping the climate by causing reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm going to continue with the theme of RED projects, since that's where we have the most evidence to date, and compare accounting and impact evaluation. So next slide, please. In both cases, if we're looking at a RED project, you'd have to identify the area where RED is being implemented and have a good MRV system to monitor forest change and associated emissions to get a measure of what's happening with RED. Click forward, please. The difference comes in where we're going to compare that measure to an ex-ante forecast of what was predicted to happen to forests under business as usual, the crediting baseline that Kevin was just talking about, under an accounting system, whereas on the right-hand side, under impact evaluation, we're going to compare that same measure to ex-post observation of what actually happened to the forest in comparable areas that continued under business as usual, or what's called the counterfactual. Next slide. So again, two different exercises. Under accounting, we're using that ex-ante forecast essentially to establish a performance benchmark, and we get carbon credits when emissions fall below the benchmark. On the impact evaluation side, we're using the ex-post observation to establish what would have happened given all the other policy and economic conditions and changes that occurred as RED was being implemented. And that provides feedback to investors and to policymakers about whether this RED intervention was worthwhile. So essentially, we're trying to measure similar things with the ex-ante forecast and the ex-post observation. But next slide. But that doesn't mean you can just plug one in for the other. So the ex-ante forecast, we've seen amply documented, that doesn't work as a measure of the counterfactual because it doesn't account for all the other changes happening in the world. But equally, the ex-post observation that we use for impact evaluation can't plug into an accounting or a contracting system because fundamentally we don't know it when the contract is being set up, and it depends on activities and outcomes in areas that aren't under the control of the parties to the contract. So again, these aren't equivalent things, although certainly we should learn from one for the other. So next slide, please. So one generates carbon credits, the other generates feedback on the crediting system, as Kevin was just describing. That feedback on the crediting system is important both for learning whether it works for the climate and for improving our methodologies. So I want to go forward with 2 examples of impact evaluation to look at the methodologies we use and sort of lay the groundwork for talking about how those can be used to improve our forest carbon accounting system. So next slide. So the most basic approach to impact evaluation is to track, in this case, we're going to say forest change before the REDD intervention and after the REDD intervention in the REDD area, but also in a comparable area where everything else is similar except there's no REDD. And then we're going to look at the differences in the trends in the REDD area and the comparison area, and that's going to be the measure of our impact called BACI for before or after control intervention. Next slide. So the example I'll give you of this methodology is from CIFOR's Global Comparative Study. It was mentioned earlier. In this study, CIFOR looked at 23 sites across 6 countries, and we selected villages both inside the REDD intervention areas and matched similar comparison villages outside the REDD areas. And then we collected data before and after. Ran lots of surveys, collected lots of information relevant to livelihoods and local well-being. But today I just want to focus on the impact on forest cover. So next slide. Using one of the most common sources, so using Hansen's Global Forest Change data, we looked at what happened before and after on the left-hand side here in the sites and in the specific villages we had selected. And then on the right-hand side of this little figure, we compared what happened in the sites to what happened in the surrounding jurisdiction and what happened to the villages in the sites to what happened to the villages outside of the sites, the matched villages. Click forward, please. So the one thing I want to highlight about this study is that the green gets larger in this bottom right box. What this means is that in more sites, we found potentially that REDD was reducing deforestation, and that's when we used the best impact evaluation methods. So we went to a set of villages that were matched so that they had similar underlying drivers of deforestation or only different in terms of whether they were in the REDD area. And when we did that, we were most likely to find the impact of REDD on reducing deforestation. Next slide. So that's one way to generate this comparison group, is to come up with a matched set of villages. Click forward, please. A second method that's gotten a lot of attention recently is called synthetic control. And in this case, instead of selecting a set of villages, we look at all the possible comparison areas and come up with a weighted combination of comparison areas that also are matched on the underlying drivers of forest change, so similar population density, distance to road, for example. But in addition, they're matched on the historical trajectory of forest change. So click forward, please. The example I'll look at here is a study led by Thales West of 12 Verra certified projects in the Brazilian Amazon in this time period. And click forward. We looked at all 12 of those projects. Next slide, sorry. So I do want to go to this slide, and I realize there's a lot of information here, so now click forward. We're just going to focus on this top left box, so one of the projects we looked at. And what we were doing here is over 2000 to 2019, looking at cumulative deforestation. So the red line shows you how much deforestation was happening in the REDD project. And the blue line, it shows you that in the time period up to the REDD project, we were coming up with a weighted combination of comparison areas that followed the same trajectory of deforestation. So the red and the blue line match.
One
minute,
forward. Aaron.
Okay,
Thanks.
click forward. After the REDD project, then we look at the difference between those two lines to get a measure of the impact of the REDD project. So in this case, as you would expect, we find lower deforestation in the REDD project than in the synthetic control, than in the weighted comparison of control areas, which is what you would hope for in a REDD project. But now pull back and look at all 12 boxes. That's not the general result here, right? The general result is really mixed outcomes. In some cases, there's more deforestation in the REDD project than in the comparison area. In most cases, including the ones I've highlighted for you, there's no significant difference. So no causal impact on deforestation using this method. This is a really surprising result because these projects are claiming carbon credits and selling them in the offset market and the voluntary carbon market. So why is that happening? Click forward, please. To explain that, I'm going to take us back to this slide. laying out the basic Baki methodology. Remember, the fundamental difference here is that we've got the benefit of hindsight. We're looking at forest change after in those comparison areas. That's something the projects didn't know when they set up their baseline and couldn't have used as part of their contracting. So a fundamental difference in methodology here. It's one point. The second point and last point is that basically we find that these projects are not having as much of an impact on forest carbon emissions as they claimed. In fact, not having any impact on forest carbon emissions. That's an enormous problem that we need to address, right, in terms of how we implement those projects, but also how we implement the system that forest carbon accounting to determine how many credits they're generating. So hopefully that lays the groundwork for the rest of the discussion here. You can click through to my last slide, which is to say that we have identified a challenge. Kevin was already talking about that. I'm sure Basanta will talk about that also. And I think there's opportunities to draw on methodologies of impact evaluation to help develop a better forest carbon accounting system. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron, and sorry for the starting problems with your presentation. So we move now directly to Sven. Sven Wunder is our next speaker. He's a principal scientist. He's an economist with the European Forestry Institute. He is also affiliated as a senior scientist with CIFOR, where he worked for 18 years, so former colleague. And he's also honorary professor at the University of Copenhagen. He holds MA and PhD degrees in economics. He has a habilitation in forest economics from the University of Copenhagen, all of those. And his work in the last 30 years has centered on forest and natural resource management, development economics, and incentives policies for forest conservation. So exactly what we're talking about in this session. And we are having another computer glitch here, as it seems. So Sven worked in basically all continents of the planet and related to the REDD+ work. Yeah. Okay. Can we start? Okay, Sven, you.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Do you have my presentation? Oh, all right. We already. Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. So this is a meta study we did on REDD+ interventions with both my EFI and my CIFOR hat on, with a number of colleagues, where we looked at what's out there in the literature in terms of forest and welfare impacts, documented in rigorous quantitative studies with impact evaluation along the principles that Aaron mentioned. So the green colors on this map show all the red action projects and some jurisdictional approaches, etc., with a certain density. The red ones, the red color shows our study sample, and yes, you can see we are able to cover fairly well sort of the universe of red intervention. And I have to jump directly to results for reasons of time. How big are these impacts from these REDD interventions on forests? So in the first part, you have REDD+ projects and programs, and I should say this includes also some of the sort of jurisdictional approaches, first generation, you would say. Jurisdictional programs, and also, for instance, a couple of NICFIs, the Norwegian supports to Guyana and to Indonesia. And both of those had significant positive impacts, but small impacts. And the overall impact is also, it is quite small, but significant and positive in all cases, but the West study on Brazil that Aaron just mentioned. We also included public pest programs that have included carbon focus, and those ones, they have a little bit less of variations. They're typically bigger, but they also typically have a positive impact. On the welfare side, we also seldom see that REDD+ projects would directly make participants' incomes or consumptions or assets decline. Typically, there would be also a small positive effect on those. At the impact stage, so this is typically self-declared welfare. How do people think they were made better off from these things? There is a bit more variation, reflecting probably in some cases that the benefits were not fully equitable distributed, and in others also that people had some higher expectations as to how much more income and consumption or assets that would be generated. So it's not a huge sample, but we can make a little bit of analysis on some of the contextual variables and under what circumstances do we see a higher effect or lower effects. And just to flag in this moderation analysis a few of those. So the more pressure there was to start with, the more successful projects are in showing impacts. That's also what we should expect, right? Then if they are differentiating benefits, they not pay the same thing to all participants, it's actually easier to get positive socioeconomic results, probably because you can customize it to the needs and to the opportunity costs of those participants. And finally, on the forest side again, on the spatial targeting, I mean, when the program operates in a high threat area, but it also chooses participants that are particularly exposed to deforestation risks or opportunities, right? And those programs that do that do have more of an impact. How does the REDD+ impact compare to a lot of other conservation tools? We have a database for that where we can compare with other incentives, disincentives like protected areas or legal interventions, etc., or enabling factors that could be land tenure interventions or environmental education or whatever. We can see that the REDD projects do reasonably well. There's not we do not probably have a significantly large sample to show a strong statistically significant difference, but they're doing well. Although we're not looking at the costs, and some of them have been sort of boutique projects that have been quite expensive. So that's a caveat to keep in mind. And now. So all of what I've shown you here is about the impact. How do these projects do on the ground? How do they change behavior and deforestation on the ground? But I'm returning here to the type of a slide that Erin showed from another study done together with Thales West on a global sample. This is submitted to Science, and it was also picked up in a Guardian article in January that some of you may know. And again, we can see that the difference between the blue and the red line is the performance, the actual deforestation, and the synthetic control, computed deforestation. What would have happened without the project? Those differences are variable again, just like in the other study that Aaron showed. But what is remarkable though is that the yellow part. Yes, thank you. The yellow part that's in here is kind of the baselines that were adopted by these projects, and you can see sort of for many of them a hockey stick type of pattern that they assumed that as soon as the project started, there would be a strong pickup in baseline deforestation, and this comes back to your comment here in front. that the baselines actually have a large influence on the alleged non-performance of some of these credits. So my takeaway messages from this. I think if we look at the type of interventions, what are these things, what are these projects and these programs doing on the ground? I mean, REDD+ is to carbon what integrated conservation and development projects have been to biodiversity, namely quite a heterogeneous mix of on-the-ground interventions, many type of interventions. Will that be different now that we have a jurisdictional approach? Yes, to some extent it will, because we will have policies instead, but they're also quite complex policy mixes. So we will still have a need to disentangle these different components and understand how they work in order to learn whether things work well or not. Second, we find forest impacts here that are statistically significant, so that's encouraging. They are quite modestly sized, that's less encouraging. But so are many of the other conservation tools that we have out there in our toolbox. I think those first generation jurisdictional approaches that were in there, they're not performing any better or worse than the rest. So it's not that it's going to be a completely game changer that we shift to a jurisdictional approach. Third, REDD+, including those jurisdictional approaches, we can see that it would have had more impact if more of them were spatially targeted to high threat, for instance, carbon areas. So these actions need to go much more to where the real fight for deforestation is, and choose less of high and far areas where the pressure is not that large. Fourth, I think for a system to be to have integrity, I think we do need new methodologies for realistic ex-ante baselines. This has already been discussed. And finally, I find it a bit worrying that if we look at the rollout of these new jurisdictional actions, there's very little research accompanying those actions. So, and that would be necessary for the future impact evaluations, for us to know in the future what policies will actually change. I don't think we even know that for sure many times. What impact did these policies have, different components of it, and why did some of them maybe work better or worse than others? So hopefully some of the donors are rethinking that part as well in order to put some fundamentals in place for us in the future to know in 5 to 10 years whether these programs have been a success or not. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That ends our presentations round. Now we're going to the panelists round. So the next panelist is online. It's Basanta Gautam. He's a manager for REDD Technical Innovation at Verra. So he leads the implementation of Verra's ongoing updates to the avoiding unplanned REDD methodologies. He came to Verra from more than 14 years at Arbonaut Limited in Finland, a firm that collects and processes data for forest inventory. And so he has the experience that from there he brought into the Verra team, working with multicultural teams and diverse projects. He holds a master's degree in agriculture and forestry from the University of Eastern Finland, and another master's degree on remote sensing and GIS from the Center for Space Science and Technology Education in Asia and the Pacific in India, in the IIRS, the Indian Institute of Remote Sensing. So, Basanta, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I'm indeed Basanta Gautam. I'm manager at REDD+ Technical Innovation in Verra. And in this short time, I'll be presenting mainly about Verra's new consolidated REDD methodology and I'm definitely focusing on how it will help to have high integrity forest carbon projects. Next slide, please. So during these 6-7 minutes, I'll be talking about these mainly 5 bullet points. Next slide, please. Before going into detail, just one slide on Vera. So Vera develop carbon standards, and currently we have 5 voluntary carbon standard, and the BCS and the JNR are the one that address RED, and other sustainable development verified impact standard, and CCBS, climate community and biodiversity standard also. RED Plus project can have level of these standard to get more value on the project activity. And the latest one is the plastic waste reduction standard. However, in this presentation, I'll be focusing on the red side. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just the overview slide of the Vera's RED work. It's also Kevin highlighted a little bit in his presentation earlier. So we have at the moment standalone 5 standalone standard for RED projects. And then these 5 projects have been for some time implementing, and these 5 standard, and then now we are working on consolidated RED methodology. So basically, we are combining or integrating all these 5 standards and also the experience from these 5 standards into one. And the draft RED methodology draft, consolidated RED methodology, is published on our website, and there is a link later on in my slide. And right now we are in the transition phase, and the plan is that by the end of 2024, we will. After the end of 2024, all projects have to use consolidated RED methodology, and by September of this year, we will publish the final version of this consolidated RED methodology. So these 5. Methodology are for existing standalone project, and then we have the JNR also out there for some years, and the consolidated RED methodology will address more on the jurisdictional level issues that earlier presenters also highlighted. Next slide, please. And this is just the slide for introductory. So next slide, please. So I'm presenting in the interest of time the main feature of the consolidated RED methodology. So definitely the consolidated RED methodology is focusing on developing activity data at a jurisdictional level. So we know that earlier presenter Kevin, Erin, and also Seven highlighted the issues of existing RED projects, the standalone project. So from those, the issue that we have been hearing, so we would like to develop activity data. So basically, right now we are talking about deforestation related activity data, but we will go ahead with including other RED Plus activities, for example, deforestation and plus part of RED Plus activities as we learn lesson from this first phase. And this is the Vera-led process. So Vera, at the moment, actually, we are in the process of developing this activity data for 12, 13 jurisdictions. But as I said, by the end of 2024, when when the projects have to use consolidated RED methodology, we will have this jurisdictional level activity data for all jurisdictions with BCS RED project. And as we are scaling up to jurisdictional level, definitely we need to align these activities in keeping in mind with the UNFCCC RED framework and Paris Agreement and in the national determined contribution. So these are the motivation also to work on the consolidated RED methodology. And another key
You've got 1 minute.
for this.
You've got 1 minute left.
Okay, thanks. Slide, please. Yeah, let me focus this 1 minute on this important slide. So this is the technical one, and then so as I said, the jurisdictional level baseline activity data that Vera is leading through contracting service provider, and the main the main point of this also is that to map the jurisdictional deforestation risk. For example, as Sevin highlighted earlier, the jurisdiction in all is not equally risky for deforestation. What we want to do is that which part of the jurisdiction, which part of the forest in a jurisdiction is risky. So for that, we will use in the first phase as a benchmark that is distance to forest edge as the criteria, but we have to see also lessons from this first phase. So after that, the activity data, deforestation activity data will be allocated to VCS RED project, which the project proponent or the project developer will take it forward, applying project specific emission factors. And there are definitely different stages of technical and BBV assessment done by Vera. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is my last slide, the last slide of the main content, the opportunity and challenges, and there are definitely opportunities for this that we already discussed, also the importance of the jurisdictional level, and then collaboration with the different other standard. We know that there are some other standard, for example, EIT trees and FCPF framework, and also this will minimize the risk of leakage in the jurisdiction. The challenges are that based on our experience, reaching out to government is definitely one challenge, and alignment of different data sets, specifically the FRL submitted to UNFCCC, and also the understanding the market quality that is needed to scale up these activities. So these are some of the challenges. Next slide, please. This is final slide, and there are just resources that you can see, and there is also opportunity for submitting existing data. So there is also a link. So with this, I would like to thank you and open for question, please.
Thank you, Basanta, and particularly for staying in time. Next and last panelist is now Asami. She's here with us in the room. Asami Segundo. She is from the Ikalahan tribe in the Philippines, which literally means people of the forest. And her community was the first indigenous peoples group whose land rights were recognized by the government in the Philippines. She studied in the Kalahan Academy, a high school founded by her elders, and then she took up a Bachelor of Science of Forestry in Social Forestry in the University of Los Baños. She has been working as a forestry professional for 8 years. She serves currently as a technical expert on spatial data gathering, map processing, and analyst for the Philippine Association for Intercultural Development. She provides technical assistance in community mapping and resource inventory for the defense of IP and territorial rights in the International Land Coalition, and she's also the focal person exploring carbon financing opportunities for her own IP organization, or for her IP organization, the Kalahan Educational Foundation. So, Asami, we would like to hear from you.
Thank you, Chris. So a while ago, one of our speakers showed the elements that composes high-integrity carbon credits. And while those components are very important, I believe that another element should also be included, and that is the recognition of human rights. For us indigenous peoples rights. And for that to happen, we must consider into account the following. First is ownership. Who owns the carbon? It is not hidden from everybody that most of the carbon is stored in various ecosystems rich in biodiversity, such as forests, rivers, and seas, among others. Most of these ecosystems overlap within indigenous territories. The richness of these ecosystems actually resulted from the pivotal role of indigenous knowledge systems and practices in resource management. For carbon to be high integrity, it must recognize that IPs deserve the rights of ownership of carbon. Another consideration is obtaining genuine free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC. I would like to highlight on the prior and informed. FPIC recognizes the rights of the indigenous peoples to decide whether they want to enter into REDD Plus or not. In order to make an informed decisions, indigenous peoples deserve the rights to be informed in a language that they can understand. We have been talking about REDD Plus carbon credits for several years now, but very few indigenous peoples fully understand what it is, its processes, and how benefits can be accessed. It must be noted that FPIC does not just happen at the very early stage just to get a yes or no for a project, but it must be applicable all throughout the process of the project. This gap must be addressed to have a high integrity carbon credit. Aside from FPIC, full and effective participation of indigenous communities in the whole process must also be allowed. This means that they have access to data during baselining, they participate in data gathering, and have a say in methodologies. They should have the power to make decisions, not just on whether they want the project or not, but in every stage of the project. Also, IPs must have access and ownership to data obtained from the project. Carbon projects should also enhance and strengthen the traditional governance of the indigenous community. It should also enhance community cohesion and solidarity. Initiatives that bring new resources may result in divisions and factions if access and benefit sharing arrangements are not appropriate and properly handled. Before I end my response, I would like to raise an issue that IPs in the Philippines have encountered. Just last year, 2 indigenous territories, one of them my indigenous cultural community, tried to enter the carbon market but was disqualified to enter the REDD Plus because we have low deforestation and degradation rates. This is because of the concept of additionality. If we cannot enter the carbon market because of our effective indigenous forest management that has great contribution in carbon removals, what other options do we have to access carbon funding? I could talk about IPs and our rights, but what I'm really trying to say is that carbon credits should be ethical. In a sense, high integrity carbon is ethical carbon, to reiterate that there is no climate justice without human rights. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Asami. Bring in an additional element that was not really reflected before in the contribution. So we are opening now the question and answer part. So we're opening the floor for. Sorry?
We have one from the audience.
We have one from the audience. No. Who's from the? Oh,
Online.
yeah, one online. Okay. While the audience makes up, while you make up your mind what to ask. So I'm reading from the online contribution. What can REDD project developers do to increase the integrity of their projects, particularly regarding atmospheric integrity, before being able to implement the new REDD consolidated methodologies, which in some cases will be 2025? Putting it differently, is there something project developers can do in the next couple of years to increase the integrity of their projects? So, do you want me to repeat the question, or is anybody ready to respond to that in the panel? Yeah, okay, go ahead, Kevin.
Was the question specifically on atmospheric integrity? Was that correct? Yeah. Okay, well, I can just speak to that.
What to do to increase the integrity, yeah.
Okay, I'll just speak to the atmospheric integrity. If you're implementing a project with a methodology, you're kind of beholden to that methodology until you transition. But in the meantime, there's always things you can do to reduce your risk of reversals. There's always things you can do to be better controlling for leakage. There's treatment of those risks already in the existing methodologies, so you can always just try to do a better job there. But I think that the big jump is going to come when you're able to transition to the new methodology.
Okay. Anybody else? Other comments or other questions from here? Okay.
Could I jump in, Christopher?
Yes, Aaron, sorry, I don't see you somewhere. Please come in.
It tells me my camera is no longer working, but you can see my little bubble there.
You do.
So just a quick comment. I think in the very short term, even given Kevin's comment that developers need to follow the established methodologies, I agree that that's true, but I think there's also room for them to apply a basic plausibility check. So I'm referring back here to what Sven mentioned, that if you look at that hockey stick type baseline, where lots of projects were projecting a very strong increase in deforestation after the start of their RED project. I think in many cases, if developers looked at that, they would recognize that it was implausible, even if they got to it by following the methodology. So I would argue for, in the short run, applying a basic sort of plausibility check on the baselines and being a little bit more cautious about those. And I think that will really contribute to the credibility and the sustainability of the carbon market.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, plausibility check on the baselines. Anybody wants to comment? Sven, yeah.
I just wanted to stick my neck out and really come out with a heretic thought. I mean, what if we were a bit to actually develop a standard where you use impact evaluation to validate the credits exposed, so that you perhaps, of course, if you have like a factor, external factor, let's say agricultural commodity prices go down and there's less pressure, and of course you as a project implementer have done a lot of investments, etc. You've done all you could, but actually the pressure turned out not to be that large. So it's like an external risk, but we have other external risks, like we have credit buffers for fire, for instance. We got something that burned down, and so we could think about a buffering mechanism, an insurance mechanism, whereby that could be activated in case that there are some heavy discrepancies between, as we've seen here lately, between the baselines or the size of the credits that were being imagined and the ones that are being evaluated through impact evaluation. Thanks.
So basically a credit buffer for all those unwanted effects. Yeah, okay, that's going to be an interesting question, but let's go back to, in this case, Eliza from the audience.
So I'm Maria Elisa Villarino from the CIFOR Initiative on Low Emission Food Systems. I'm addressing this question to Sven. This is based on your 5 takeaway messages, where you mentioned that RED Plus, including jurisdictional approaches, could have more impact if action spatially targeted high-threat forest carbon-dense areas. I wonder what were the factors that influenced this targeting, and what can be done in such a way that this could be addressed, so that there would be more high-threat forest carbon-dense areas as targets for RED Plus. I mean, yeah, that's what I'm getting.
So I think it's at 2 different levels. One is where the sites you choose to go to, whether that is an area where there is some active deforestation going on already, or whether it's only in the more remote future you think that deforestation will arrive. So that will make a difference. But also in sort of the way you say you have a large project area, you're not immediately going to be able to focus on every person and every landowner that in that area, that you give certain priority to those areas that are near the roads, for instance, or in other ways that are exposed to a more direct threat that will matter in the short term, in the short to medium term, if you want.
Okay, there's a gentleman in the back, and then you.
Okay, thank you very much for the excellent presentation about the high integrative forest carbon market. Actually, after spending more than 15 years, actually this is the time to reflect this is the time to reflect about the RED Plus very honestly. At the ground level, if we review the ground level situation, actually the situation is slightly different if we discuss about only focusing on the technical aspect, sometimes it may not work very effectively at ground level. For example, the emission reduction program document, in many countries, emission reduction program document are developing, but at ground level, people don't know about what is written in the document. Similarly, about the benefit sharing plan. In many countries, about the benefit sharing plan of the RED Plus program is really very big debate, conflict between government and the affected communities. Similarly, actually the carbon title is transferring without FPIC of the indigenous people and local communities, and it has created lots of conflict at ground level. So therefore, there are lots of issues surround this RED Plus, activities or program at ground level. Therefore, my concern is that we need to consider about different aspect, not only the technical methodological aspect, but we have to consider about the other elements. For example, benefit sharing plan, carbon title transfer, and the effective implementation of the emission reduction program document. For example, in many countries, the government have prepared. Can
you keep yourself short?
The government have prepared MRB report, but it is really very less transparent. This is the situation. Therefore, how we can maintain the transparency in the whole RED Plus program? This is the major concern. Thank you.
Many thanks. Maybe we take two together. Or you, yeah. So please. Here. Francis. Yes. Oh,
Thank you.
Sorry for that.
Hi, I'm Isa. I'm from Carbon Market Watch. Thank you all for the very interesting presentations. I have a question. It's mainly addressed at Kevin, I think, but it was about the first slide that kind of stuck with me, where you said we need to find a way to balance environmental integrity with scaling. And that struck me because I don't really see the point in scaling something that has no integrity. So where do you see this balance, and where do you see integrity as kind of a fundamental requirement for even thinking about scaling anything? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, thanks guys. My name's Lily Mara. I'm with Terra Global Capital. And Asami, I guess I'm just curious, when the question was asked before about the targeting, the exact areas you said were ineligible with your community's protection of their own forest. I just wondered if you had a reflection on the previous question and about how we kind of balance that requirement versus what indigenous peoples have already been, how well you've been conserving your land. Just any reflections you have on that point, I'd be interested to hear.
Thanks. That's a nice question. Yeah. Okay. Who wants to start? You, Kevin. You had the second question.
Sure. Well, yeah. I'll address the one that was directed to me. So I did not. I don't want to communicate that integrity is something that should be sacrificed in the name of scale. I think what I was trying to highlight is that a lot of the discussions that are happening now in about integrity are not considering that there's a risk that if RED doesn't scale, then like what are we doing? Like why are we bothering? So it has to come into discussion. It's not a dirty word. RED is a market-based mechanism. It's about financial transfers for a product that's being produced developing countries and being sold to developed countries. So we have to be talking about financial reality, and that in the design of any system, you need to balance the elements of it. Get as high as integrity as you can, while ensuring that you actually have a product that can actually be a model that can actually work in practice.
Thanks. Okay, Sven.
Yes, I just wanted to address this interesting question about, indigenous people and targeting to threat sort of as a possible contradiction. I think it is a trade-off for us to manage, and I think for instance, in payments for environmental services program around the world, it has also been possible to somehow manage that trade-off in a way that you would, for instance, allocate maybe 25% of your funding to high forest, low deforestation areas where you pay people that reward them for the good use of land that they are making, and you also, with that, limiting your leakage dangers of deforestation moving into the other areas. And by that, you gain also more credibility in terms of the sense of equity and fairness of a scheme of that type, which you will always need for it to be able to succeed on the ground. But I think if you really want to have an impact, and that is what these assessments show, then you need to invest the majority of your resources into those open frontiers. And maybe it's not the most violent ones, where there maybe you may not be able to compete with the opportunity costs are just too high. Maybe it's the more intermediate range that you should target. Say, here we can buy out deforestation, and here we should use our funding in a targeted way to actually do it.
Thank you for your questions. When the investor presented to my community that we have low deforestation and therefore we are not viable for REDD+, one of our elders jokingly said, "Can we do a calculated deforestation just for us to enter REDD+?" He jokingly said that, but I think we now get it if we do not fund or if we do not give access to funds to the people who are taking care of the forest. Indigenous peoples should have access to the forest with or without threats. Because the thing is, we have been fighting against threats for several years, for several decades. In my community, we were the first ICC, or Indigenous Cultural Community in the Philippines, who erased a mining tenement because there's a mining tenement in within our land. And because of lobbying and because of advocacy work, we were able to erase that or stop the mining in our community. And I think that's one of the reasons why there is no threat, because we've been fighting for our land. And that should be considered by the funders, that we've been fighting for our land. And it's not fair that just because we do not have threats, we do not have access to the funds.
Thank you very much. Aaron, you are online, and I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, now I've got the camera back also. So just continuing on this final question, which I agree is really interesting, I just wanted to point out that impact evaluation perhaps plays a role here, because it's been very clearly documented that indigenous territories and indigenous people's management of land does causally reduce deforestation. So there's very solid evidence on that. That's looking back in time. The issue is that when we look forward in time, if we assume that indigenous people will be managing the land because they have been granted that land, then we don't see evidence in the forest accounting framework of making a difference going forward. So I think the method of impact evaluation can still play in here. And what we're talking about is the need for a different basis for crediting, not so much offsetting future emissions, but crediting for past contributions to reducing historical emissions. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Sorry, say again?
The gentleman in the back, his question addressed.
No, you want to address it? Quick, yeah, go ahead. So one more comment from Kevin.
Yeah, just to address the gentleman in the back who had the question about not focusing on the technical carbon issues, but on the benefit sharing and equity. And I would just say that those issues are at the forefront of really doing a REDD project on the ground. That's what you spend 90% of your time actually doing when you're setting one up. So they're not underappreciated by any means. But it's really hard to do. It's really complex, tons of stakeholders, very context specific. And I think some of why we like this model of transitioning from the project scale through this kind of intermediary jurisdictionally aligned methodology up to jurisdictional is because we've seen a lot of countries that have gotten RED readiness support to develop national safeguard systems, benefit sharing plans, all this stuff. But because those jurisdictional programs never got up and running, all of that work is like 5 or 8 years out of date now. All those stakeholders have moved on. So it's you need to have something that works at a scale where there's actually financing coming through that system to activate those systems that you've put in place. So we kind of like the idea of that starting at a scale that's workable and then building it up as you've had success.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I think we are looking at a situation where we're still trying to find our feet in many aspects, and through trial and error we are seeing things improving, while at the same time there's a huge pressure to scale, and so the two things somehow don't fit to each other, but we need to find a way to make it happen. We have like 4 minutes and 5 speakers and panelists. I would like to give each of you, after having heard each other and also the questions, the chance for a last one-sentence comment. What is your final take-home message for the audience? And then we close. So whoever wants to start. Kevin, go ahead. And actually, sorry, yeah, Kevin. Let me just ask Basanta, sorry, to start first, because you haven't been saying anything. Sorry for that. Yeah. Basanta, you want to come first?
Yes.
Final take-home message.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. So just, take-home message is that the last point was made on the difference between the offsetting and difference between the offsetting and the incentive to the forest conserving community, for example, in indigenous community, right? So for the offsetting, we do need additionality. So for that, for carbon market to buy those kind of credits, we need to have proven additionality. So that's what I wanted to make a difference. For those high forest, low deforestation rate, they should be they should get payment or whatever incentive they need, but it should not be like in addition to the offsetting. So there should be different kind of funding mechanism for these two, offsetting and the high forest area. The other point that I wanted to make is that from Vera's perspective, that so we are starting up with the jurisdictional approach, and we will upscale this. But as Kevin said, that we have to based on something that is already done. So that's why it's not like that jurisdiction is panacea for everything. This is what we are building on the existing project. And those examples that Erin and Seven showed, those are just problematic projects. So I would say that let's also see those successful projects also. There are many successful projects out there. So I think just picking up by media, for highlighting few projects, the negative things is not probably helping. Of course, this is good that will help us to have a good successful jurisdictional project. But let's go on, not just like saying that RED Plus projects are problematic, but just that take example and a lesson learned and go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Basanta. Okay, Kevin, now it's you.
Sure. I think we all understand that we haven't solved the problem of tropical deforestation. We don't have a lot of great tools in our toolkit. As Sven showed, not anything is really working all that well. But RED is, we think it's promising, and this is really the best time for it. We're really excited for the next 5 years. We think that the conditions are in place. The financing is there, it's ready. We have the capacity built around the world. We have the technical expertise. We have the new methodologies. So we think these are the next 5 years where we're gonna, it's either gonna happen or it's not. So we would invite the world who is interested in, these technical issues to focus as much as possible on constructive improvement to them and improving integrity, but making this work while we still have time.
positive outlook, and I think science is there to provide that objective and impartial opportunity for learning, and not necessarily for being destructive. And I think that's the spirit of the science work. Sven.
So when Sir Nicholas Stern wrote his report about RED Plus some 15 years ago, it was, this is a splendid opportunity, economically speaking, to mitigate climate change in an easy and cheap way. I think what we've learned out is it's maybe not that easy, but I think the basic diagnostics are still valid. I don't think we can afford to ignore these options of slowing deforestation as part of our strategy. I do think, though, that with some of the discussions we've had, some of the results that we've seen, if we are in a situation where even a comedian like John Oliver picks up carbon offsets, then we have a problem, right? We have a problem, and I think we need to think creatively about the whole institutional architecture around these things in order to improve them and make them work better. And I think there are some real options out there.
Thank you, Sven. Before we circulate to Asami, I want to bring in Aaron, who is online, so we don't forget you, Aaron. Because we don't see you.
Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate that. Right. So now I'm over top of all of you. I can see myself on the screen behind you. So I want to pick up on Sven's point that, yes, we have a problem. We've identified we have a problem, and lots of people are aware of it, so we need to address it. I am completely optimistic that we are on track to address this problem. So I'm coming to you from the U.S. I know there are programs here in the U.S. that are developing new methodologies for the dynamic baselines that are now allowed under Vera, and new systems for sort of allocating that risk so that the landowners, the smallholders in that system don't bear the risk of being judged against a counterfactual, but the system as a whole absorbs the risk. So again, I'm optimistic that we're on track to address these issues, that there are lots of people who are running to try to incorporate new methodologies and new approaches to testing additionality. But not to be totally Pollyannish, I would also like to say that I do not think we're on track to address the issues that Asami addressed, right? And as Basanta just pointed out, there I think we really need to be thinking about a fundamentally different funding stream to compensate those who have been holding the carbon stock that we're now trying to preserve through these other types of systems that we're bringing online. So that's it from me.
Thanks, Aaron, and a great segue to Asami.
I would say that many indigenous peoples' organizations are very much interested in joining the carbon market and selling their carbon credits. And I would like to agree with Basanta's suggestion for a creation of another funding mechanism and specific for indigenous peoples. But if we're going to create that, inclusion and participation of indigenous peoples in its creation is a must. So we must be, the presence of indigenous peoples in that conversation, in that design, should also be assured. And that's it.
Thank you very much. I think Kevin started reminding us that 15 years ago or 20 years ago, none of this existed. And so we should be impatient, but maybe not too much, because things take time to be developed and takes learning and error. But we seem to be on a good way, and by joining forces, we may be getting there. So thanks everybody for being here. Thanks. Please help me giving a clap of hands to all the speakers. Thanks a lot for being here and for contributing to this great session. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.